so I hope that's okay. We want to be able to share this with people who weren't able to attend tonight later so that they can still see and get the information. So if you don't want your face on the recording, you can turn off your video. So welcome to this information session about the new Educational Trip Leader program, and specifically what it would mean to be an Educational Trip Leader instructor. So before we go any further, I'd like to just introduce the members that are on the Oversight Committee, and they're going to introduce themselves, where they work, and then also who they represent on the committee, because those representations are set in statute. So Megan Mack, go ahead.
Hello there, I am Megan Mack. That's my first name, surname Nicholson. I work for the Hyde School, and I'm the Director of Outdoor Education and our North Campus in Eustis, Maine. And on the committee, I am representing a guide with extensive educational trip leading experience.
Thanks, Megan Mack. Jen, can you go ahead?
Sure can. Good to see you all tonight. My name is Jen Adams. I work at Chewunky as the Director of Outdoor Programs, and I am representing someone who is also on the Camp Trip Leader Permit Committee.
Thanks, Jen. Chris.
Hi, everybody. Good to see some familiar faces. Chris Hayward. I work at Gould Academy, Director of Experiential Learning there. I also help run Mahoosic Mountain Search and Rescue in Western Maine. I'm representing secondary private schools.
Thanks, Chris. Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hubert. I'm the guidance counselor at Winthrop High School, and I am representing public K-12 schools.
Thanks, Sarah. Mike Woodruff is also on the committee. He works at Bowdoin, and he's representing private higher education on the committee. My name is Lauren Jacobs. I'm a lecturer in outdoor leadership at the University of Maine. I run our outdoor leadership academic program, and I am on the committee representing public higher education. So that's your committee. We're all volunteers, just so you know. So we're doing our best to bring this on board, and we're really excited to have you all supporting our work. I am going to screen share now so that we can sort of dive into the meat of the topic here. Okay, so give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Awesome, thank you. All right, so please go ahead and mute yourself now if you haven't already, just because there's quite a few people on the call. And if you have questions while we're talking, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Jen is going to do a really good job of moderating that and keeping an eye on things. I will say we're going to get through some information first and then get to the questions later. But if you're worried you're going to forget your question, you can type it in anytime. But we think that a lot of the information we share at the beginning will hopefully answer many questions you might have. So our agenda is just a quick welcome and intro, some history of ETL, the role of ETL instructors, and a brief overview of the ETL curriculum, what the application process will look like, and then we will leave hopefully plenty of time for questions and where to find more info. All right, so first up.
Okay, I think that's me. So as we go through the next few slides, I'm not going to read every word that's on the slides, but it's there for folks that get this recording after and for you to process as you like to process. But I would encourage you to think about how does what we're presenting apply to you in your setting. I don't know who everyone is on the call and who you represent. So think about that, what is presented and what questions you would gather after you hear this. We can go to the next one. So we're going to go back in time, 1897. That's when the Maine legislature required hunting guides to register with the state. The first guide registered was a woman, and 1,300 were registered that year. Now is the time to start thinking about how this applies to you, and this is where some of the fuzziness got confusing a few years ago. Maine state law defines guides as a person who receives any form of remuneration. So this got a little confusing when teachers from institutions were guiding trips in wilderness areas or on water, but they didn't think they were getting directly paid for that role. So they didn't think that the rule applied to them. We'll get into that a little bit more. In the 80s, the camp trip leader permit was started, and they were able to come up with a program that allowed the camps to train their camp employees in how to take trips out safely. That program does not apply to educational institutions. So for a school like Gould Academy, I can't just become a camp and start certifying my guides, my leaders as camp trip leaders to get to find that loophole to be in compliance. So that's where a lot of this, it builds up to the educational trip leader. Camps are registered through DHS and educational institutions, typically through the Department of Education. Okay, so for schools, a school like Gould, we historically take kids out on lots of adventures, and very few of our trip leaders are guides. And we did not really think we were doing anything wrong. It's just the way it's always been done. But we have been out of compliance since 1897 is how I read it. That's a long time doing trips and not really following the rules. And all the other schools that do orientation trips, backcountry trips, paddling trips on Maine inland waters are also out of compliance. So this process isn't really the state asking us to do something above and beyond. This is something for us to pay attention to so we can all be in compliance. And the Maine guides, we'll get into it in a little bit, are supportive of this process. And we've had a hearing and quite a lengthy process to get to this point where everyone's on board and believes in this process. So in 2020, I referenced the hearing. There were a lot of guides there, a lot of educational trip leaders, and sharing their thoughts on what needed to happen. And that took quite a long time to get through, process all that information. And in the end, the legislature asked us to form this committee. There was some discussion about, can we just adopt the camp trip leader process? Can we just sort of fall under that umbrella? And that was not really going to work for many reasons. Summer camps are typically in the summer, and our educational institutions are the other 9 months of the year. So there's not really clear lines there. And the camp trip leader organization, I think, wanted to protect what they had going on. And in the end, we are going to create a similar process that you'll hear about shortly, with similar standards, a similar test, and a similar process to get it. But we're kind of steering that towards the educational institutions and the purpose and philosophy of their trips. That's to Megan Mack.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is an ETL instructor. I'm pretty sure that most of you on this call are ready in the process of possibly becoming an instructor. And I see an instructor coming in 3 different forms. An ETL instructor would be one that's in-house. So say Chris with Gould Academy, he'd be instructing future ETLs that come into his school to help him run trips. I see regional instructors where an instructor can help out other institutions get their license so they have trip leaders. And then I see instructors who are a for-profit training, either personally wanting to help people get their ETL license or running a training service already. So defined, an instructor right now is a registered Maine guide, or ETL, which is educational trip leader, period, who is certified to train and certify persons at educational institutions to become ETLs. So in the beginning, there's going to be quite a push because we don't have ETLs yet to get ETL eyes in the mix so we can have more to ETL. So right now it looks like main guides will be our big push to help us get that first base level of instructors. And then further down the road, you won't have to have a main guides license in order to be an ETLI. So what are the roles of an ETL instructor? So these are the basics that an ETLI instructor would be asked. They'd be asked to complete an 8-hour course, then as well as testing and any other further training that they might need, that they know that they have steps that they need to take. They will make sure that the institutions understand that they should have a valid WFA as an instructor, and know exactly how long their certification is good for, how they get recertified, and how they move forward. So keeping them abreast of next steps. I'm going to quickly go over the basics of our curriculum so you understand what would be involved in this training. So we've narrowed it down to 6 different departments in the outdoor education safety and requirements to run a safe trip. So we have group management and facilitation, risk management, wilderness tripping skills, campcraft skills, activity-specific skills, and main outdoor industry and further experiences. And we'll go into that a little further. So again, like Chris said, I'm not going to read everything. I'm just going to give you the gist, but this is for further education for people who cannot make it tonight. So the first section for group management and facilitation, the instructor really needs to know how a group is formed, how to manage a group, what experiential learning looks like, how to be inclusive with diversity, and the general development of the age that they're working with. So that's what that first category would be. Second category is risk management across the board. So emergency preparedness, like what are their emergency action plans? How do they make decisions when they're out there, depending on the weather, depending on the season, making sure that you feel comfortable as an instructor that they are going to lead a safe trip for their students. Third category is wilderness tripping skills. So basics of weather, navigation, trip planning, land use permitting, landowner relations, minimum impact, leave no trace. And when you're working with the institution, really understanding where they're going and setting them up for success with planning proper trips for their skill level, and for the length of time that they are out. Campcraft, good old-fashioned campcraft. So making sure that they know how to treat water, build fire, have safe regulations and rules around what their fire building and tending would look like. Stove and cooking, and I see an instructor either bringing a multitude of different types of stoves and ways to cook, or asking the new ETLs or the institution to bring to them what they are using, so you can know that they're proficient in what they're using. And then health and hygiene in the backcountry. So activity-specific skills. So this one's interesting. We want to make sure bare minimum. So in order to have an ETL, you either need to be on open water or an overnight camping trip away from potable water. So bare minimum, knowing that you need to understand how to fit a PFD and just general water safety and rescue. And that will also be part of the training, like you'll actually have a link to the specified training for that A. So if you're dealing with an institution that's also taking them rock climbing or doing snow activities, you're, as an instructor, it's expected that you'll be able to advise that institution what further training they should get. If you are capable to give them that further training, great. If not, really advising them about what else they would need besides just an ETL license. The last category, it's kind of my favorite category, but it's as an instructor, really acknowledging the importance of outdoor education, acknowledging that it is a beautiful path of occupation, and knowing how one would go about furthering their own skills, their own education down the road, either individually or with their institution. Sarah?
Okay. So I'm going to explain, really go through the application that you would complete if you're interested in becoming an educator trip leader instructor. So at any moment now, this application is going to appear before our eyes. There it is.
Can you see it? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So unlike a form you might have filled out for a registered Maine guide or camp trip leader through IF&W, this form is a Google form. So we'll provide this form. It will be linked in the IF&W website somewhere. And I think we can share that link out tonight. So this is the form that you would complete if you're interested in becoming an instructor. And these applications at this time, because we don't have administrators approved just yet, in the future, what would happen is someone who wants to be an instructor would then work with an administrator, have them sign off on the form as well. And so the idea right now is it would go to the oversight committee, which is us here, and then we'll be in touch with you within 30 days about the status of your application. So the requirements are, and you've heard some of them already, you do have to be 18 years old or older. Right now, currently a registered Maine guide, and once some people get their ETL permit, then they can apply to be an instructor. You do have to have documentation that you have experience teaching in the outdoors and working in the outdoors with youth. And you also have to provide references. We ask for your name, your address, your phone number, your email, the basics, date of birth. So here we're asking you, this applies, are you currently holding an ETL permit? Are you currently a registered Maine guide? Or you could be both. And then we're asking when those expire. So if you have a Maine guides license, whatever the expiration date is, and then if you could also provide your Moses ID from your Maine guide license. I do not know if ETL permit holders yet will have a Moses ID number. That's a good question.
I think they will get one from the state.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. And then here is where you're basically, you can type right in here, or you can copy and paste from a document. This is the best way we thought you could submit the response to this one. But some highlights about your experience in the outdoors as an outdoor leader with students, with educational groups, include some certifications or licenses that you currently hold. And then as you go to the next one, list.
Hold on, I have to put in a fake answer. It won't let me go to the next
Oh,
section.
okay.
That's really annoying. Sorry, everybody.
This will be a good demo on how quick it is to fill out the application though.
Yeah,
Oh, look, that's an invalid date.
on the calendar.
That's funny. I didn't even think about that. All right, there we go.
Okay, and then here, please list 3 references, those who can speak to your experience, specifically to working with students in the outdoors. And then if you've watched this video, then you could click yes. And then this is where you're acknowledging that the information that you put on this form is correct. Then you'd hit submit and we would review this and get back to you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much to all the committee members for chiming in with all that information. I'll add just a couple thoughts and then we'll wrap up with questions. Some of the info that was helpful to know, I think, before this was in that FAQ document that we shared. We will reshare that in the chat again today, so you can link to it and save it. That FAQ document will be updated and then posted to the DIF&W website. We're not doing it yet because we thought that tonight we actually might get some questions we need to add to it. So we haven't made it live yet. But that FAQ document really helps explain the whole thing with the ETLs. And tonight we are sort of focused on you, our potential first sort of cohort of instructors. So these are the people running the ETL trainings that are required to hold an ETL permit. So that's sort of what we're focused on tonight. But if you have bigger general questions about ETL, the whole program, that's okay too, because if you have those questions, other people probably have those questions. So please feel free to add questions in the chat and we will answer them. If you're sort of uncomfortable posting them to everyone, you can post them directly to Jen Adams and she can read them out loud. But that's, those are the big things. So we would love to hear your questions. And while people are formulating questions, I will also put some links in the chat as well. Great. So David Becca asked, will slides be available afterward? Yes. I'm planning to send out an email to everyone with a link to this recording because it's going to be public. We want people to understand where we're coming from with all this. And I can also attach the slides as well. Which reminds me, if everyone could go ahead right now and put their email in the chat, that would be really, really helpful so that I have everyone's email. So please share that.
I'm curious to know if anyone learned something or was surprised by anything. Well, before we started, I was wondering if anyone knew this was happening or if everyone was coming in blind.
Good question. So another question that came in, and committee members, I will throw them to you if I need help, but feel free to pipe up too if you need to add anything or want to add anything. So and I'm going to read your questions out loud so that when this is on YouTube, people know what I'm talking about because the chat doesn't show up. So is there any basic naturalist knowledge expected for an ETL? No. I think we would love for that to be part of it, but we're really focused on most basic safety essential skills in the training. Ryan asks, will there be training for the cohort of instructors or is it just the application? Right now, we do not have a scheduled training for ETL instructors, and we're focused mostly on just your ability to instruct the curriculum. And we feel like, especially at the beginning, we can do that because we know all of you and we know your skill level, and then we'll, check on that through the application process. I do think that in the future, there may be some like train the trainer sort of trainings, but we don't have that scheduled yet. I will point out that we are having our very first ETL training session on November 6th at the Samoset during the MAPERD conference. And so that would be an opportunity to sort of observe a first training and honestly to give feedback too, both like learn what it's about, but also potentially give feedback. So people are welcome to be there that day if you would like. And if you want more info, you can reach out to me. Is there a set number of student to ETL ratio? Yes, it will be 1 to 12 max for any activity. And then will that number be the same for 18 plus? Oh, if the students are over 18? Yes, I don't believe there's any exception. Correct, people, my cohort is nodding at me. Yeah, there's no exception. So that ratio is the same, 1 to 12. And then would it be 1 ETL and 1 non-certified adult to 12 students? Yeah, so a non-certified adult would not count as allowing you to have extra students.
And I would add to that the industry standard is 1 to 12, but if your educational institution would prefer a lower ratio, then that may be something you want to check it.
That's a really good point, especially on water activities. Often we go for a lower ratio.
Good question, Lauren.
Can we be instructor? Oh yeah.
So
go ahead, Greg.
The one extra adult would also count under the 12 though, correct? So it'd be 11 kids plus the adult if they're not certified?
Well, that is a good question.
I would think so because you're leading, you're responsible for that group of people.
Correct, yep.
Isn't it? For every 12, you want 2 adults, but one of them needs to be an ETL. Is that a different way to say it?
Maybe we could ask that, we could clarify that.
Yeah, we can put that. We're going to keep track of questions that we just want to double check, and that would be one we can double check with our folks at the department. That's a good question, Greg.
Lauren, I would say just reading the way the rule is written is it's 1 to 12 for ETL to students to student ratio. I think that's legitimately 1 to 12. So they're part of it because you could have a post-secondary educational institution where everybody is over 18 and it wouldn't mean that you could bring 100 people with you. So I think the current interpretation for that, we didn't give any, the rule doesn't give any leeway for, the adults don't count. So I guess, as this process develops and institutions have more and more ETLs, I mean, obviously you could, if that second adult was trained, you could have more people then, even more than 12. But at this point, the way the rule is written, it is 1 to 12 and they would be included in that for sure.
Yep. Thanks, Colonel. David and Becca asked, can we be instructor trainers? So right now, there's no certification or approval needed to be an instructor trainer. So a guide could run a course preparing ETLIs. We don't have a curriculum for that, but that could be developed. Someone could develop that. The ETL permit itself, the testing process is very similar to what the testing process is for camp trip leader permits. So there's going to be a 50 question multiple choice exam. John asked a very good question. When should programs be expected to be compliant? So technically the law went into effect October 1st. But before anyone freaks out, I want to answer a few questions about that. Or give some background there. So because of the pandemic, there was already an extension built into the original statute, allowing an extension of this grace period. And it was essentially because educational institutions kind of stuck their necks out a little bit, saying, hey, we're out of compliance. We want to get in compliance. And we've worked really closely with the department. The department has been incredibly supportive. and we've been working really closely together to make this process. But and I'll say our lawyers really pushed this part. So our lawyers were like, hey, we're kind of sticking our necks out to say that we're out of compliance. We need some sort of agreeal that, you know, in the meantime, while we're setting this up, we're not going to get in trouble. And so the extension that was granted said, if you were already doing things, if you were already taking your PE class canoeing before this all came out, you can keep doing that and you won't be in trouble with the law. That grace period technically ended October 1st, so like 2 weeks ago. But you know, the department has said that they understand no one can be an ETL yet because there haven't been any ETL trainings, and we're just not there yet. So I think that it's fair to say that if you are still doing things that you've always done with the same level of preparation and risk management that you've already been doing, you should feel very confident that you can keep doing that in the meantime, but should work to get in compliance as soon as possible. I think for folks who have maybe never done anything, now would be the time to not start and to wait instead to get fully in compliance. John, does that answer your question?
It does, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. And just so everyone knows, Crystal from the department put in the actual language from the rules. So that 1-to-2 ratio the age doesn't matter. Great. Ryan asked, can you talk a bit more about what the regional groups of trainers might look like? I'll say that we don't have a plan, but Sarah, and I'll also say that I think this is the most potential for regional groups is around K-12 institutions, right? So like in higher ed, like University of Maine, we're going to do our own trainings in-house, right? But K-12 is a little bit different because there might be just, you know, one school might just need 2 ETL permit holders or 1 ETL permit holder. They don't need the whole shebang and they're not able to do it in-house. So Sarah, would you mind just talking a little bit about what that might look like for K-12?
So we could go by county, you could just go by regions of the state. It's interesting how our school districts are divided amongst group. Like there's a Western Maine Educational Collaborative that goes all the way from Bethel to Winthrop. So that's maybe not all Western Maine. So it could be you're offering a training in Bangor, people in the Bangor area just come. So it's not necessarily, the regions aren't defined. It would just be how those people could work together. It also could be an administrator. So I know we haven't talked much about that position. So there's kind of 3 levels to this, and the administrator basically is someone or an entity that coordinates the ETL instructors, so they could work with the instructors to you know, either define different regions, or you know, the administrators could say, you know, I have some schools in Southern Maine who need some training. Is there anyone willing to travel to Southern Maine to do trainings for them? So that's kind of that can be created however you feel you'd like to do that. And if you like to be an instructor that only provides trainings in a certain area, you can, or you can go statewide, something like that.
That's great, because I just wanted to, I think as this process moves forward, and number one, you are doing amazing work. Thank you for pulling this together. I know I started with this and it's a lot of work, so huge kudos to you all. Yeah, just thinking about a resource for schools, because I'm imagining, I think you see my next question is about timeline and reaching out to all these institutions. I just think about in working in higher education, all the schools that utilize the great state of Maine for orientation programs. That's going to be a huge amount of folks that are going to be looking for this. So trying to find a table or a group of folks who are willing or available to help support this. And especially I want to make sure that our K-12 schools get the support that they need to comply, to get into compliance as quick as possible. So that was what my question. So that sounds great to have like a catch-all of like, hey, great, these people are in Southern Maine or willing to travel or whatnot to help support this.
And we've also reached out to Teams to Trails. And so they're like on board with helping us with this. So that's amazing for the K-12 system, because in the K-12 setting, we don't have necessarily outdoor recreation coordinators like higher ed does. So Teens to Trails has stepped up to help with that.
And I'll add to Ryan's point about out-of-state institutions. So just like any other law, when you come to Maine, you need to follow Maine laws. And so out-of-state institutions will actually have to follow this as well. I think it's fair for me to say, speaking for the committee, that overwhelms us a little bit thinking about that. And we're very much focused more on our own in-state needs right now, like really making sure K-12 is taken care of and doing what we need to do to support higher ed. And if there were a guide or an ETL instructor who wanted to, sort of help support out-of-state institutions, I'm guessing they would welcome that. So I think you should feel like that's an open door. I don't think we're going to rush to meet their needs right at the moment, personally, but feel free. John asked, what do you think the actual numbers are statewide? John, do you mean the need for ETL permit holders, or are you thinking is ETL instructors? I think that was John Rogers that asked that
Yes,
question.
John Rogers, yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, I was actually wondering what you think the numbers might be for the actual licensing people, the people that need to be licensed statewide. I mean, I don't have any idea when you talk about it. I can look at one, I can look at high school and Megan Mack and maybe guess, and I can look at Ryan Pond and maybe guess, but I have no idea. So I was very curious about that.
That's a good question. And I don't know that we have a very good estimate. At University of Maine alone, we will have probably dozens of ETL permit holders just within our institution. And then when we think about K-12, I will also be dozens around the state. And then of course, all the private institutions. So it's going to be a lot of people.
Okay, I guess you. Okay, Thank you.
Yeah. Alicia reminded me that Washington County Community College is unfortunately Scott, who runs their outdoor program, wasn't able to be here tonight, so I'll just share with everyone that they are very interested in offering ETL training. So that would be for people wanting to hold an ETL permit over the next 6 to 9 months. And they actually have a lot of funding to do that. And so that will be designed primarily to support K-12 educators needing to go after an ETL permit. But we'll certainly share more information when he has that. And luckily, some of that workforce development money from state and federal funding can support that. So there's some funding for that. Jen, have I missed any questions?
None that I've seen.
Great. I'll be quiet for a second. So if anyone has any more questions they want to pipe up or pop it in the chat, that would be totally fine.
I'm curious. So working at UMaine, you referenced having dozens of presumably students in the ETL trainer role. I'm curious what the vision is for designating those students as ETL trainers. I work at an undergraduate institution, Colby, and I'm curious, if we can designate some of our senior students as those trainers.
So I'm sorry if that was confusing. I actually meant we would have dozens of ETL permit holders.
Oh, great. Okay.
So not instructors. But ETL permit holders can apply to be ETL instructors. And so they would need to have held their ETL permit, and they would then need to provide information just like we showed you on the application. So they, once we have people in the hopper as ETLs, and maybe they have some really good experience, they could apply to be ETL instructors.
Mhm.
That is a little bit analogous to the Camp Trip Leader program, where people can do the trainings for Camp Trip Leader, even if they're not a registered main guide, but they hold a Camp Trip Leader permit, and they've been approved by the oversight committee. So that was analogous to that program.
Thanks
Lauren,
for the clarification.
can I make a comment, Lauren?
Yep, go ahead.
One thing that Sarah had mentioned that we didn't talk too much about tonight. So there is this other level of accountability called an administrator. So there's this committee of these 7 great volunteers who have done a huge heavy lift for the department. That kind of is the oversight committee. Then there's another level, which the educational trip leader administrator, who each institution that's part of this program needs to have an administrator, and they have to be a registered main guide. And we purposely framed it that way to make sure that we kept the guide association with the program, because this is an exception to the guide laws, how it's actually written in the statute. So some of the questions I think Dave and Becca had about how do you become an instructor, or what are the qualifications, or is there a training? Once this program is up and really running, which we realize it's probably going to be a solid year before we really get our feet under us and things are in place, and there's plenty of educational trip leaders and some instructors around. That administrator, let's say, I'll use Hamden Academy because I'm from Hamden, if they're the administrator for that high school, and they're going to then select their instructors, we left it kind of broad where you had to be a certain age and have some experience leading trips. But then we really left a lot of interpretation to the administrator, because ultimately it's kind of their liability to talk to individuals and say, I know what your experience is, or sit down, provide me your resume, and I want to see what your experience is for individual trips. I don't know everybody on this call. I don't know most people on this call, but I'm pretty sure you're on here because there's people on the committee that know what your experience and your abilities are. So, if you may end up being an administrator if you want to be, or if you don't, your administrator would talk to you and say, oh yeah, you're clearly instructor level. And so there's some flexibility in there. If this program wants to develop into, teaching trip leaders to be even more so instructors for kind of a continuing education, I think that's great, but that's not necessary to begin with. And I do think that early on, there's also the question, as you mentioned, about how many educational trip leaders will there be? Well, there will be a lot of them, because there's some institutions that run a lot of trips on their own. But keep in mind that curriculum you looked at, Lauren's going to launch it, I think, next month. It's extensive, but it's also set up to be like 8 to 12 hours. So it's going to kind of be drinking from a fire hose, like all the hunter education, all the ATV stuff that we do. But the way we look at it, it's got to be manageable. So especially like K through 12 folks can take it and have time and resources to do it. But it's still light years ahead of, say, 4 years ago, when there were trips being led and we have no idea what their experience was. So I think we're moving in the right direction. This has been a lot of work, and the oversight committee has done a lot of good work around it. There's probably some things that will be tweaked over the course of the next year that, the committee will come to the commissioner and just say, this isn't working. Can we change the rule a little bit? But I think early on, this community is tight enough. They're going to know who should be the instructors, who may or may not want to be an administrator. How can we make sure we don't lose K through 12 because they don't have the resources? And that's why we have teams to trail us here, so to speak. And we'll get some people online to be trip leaders who probably will quickly do that for a short period of time and say, hey, I really enjoy this outdoor peer leadership experience. I want to be an instructor. And then if that was me and I had really limited experience, I would go to my administrator and say, or to this committee and say, hey, do you have some suggestions about how I can get some more advanced training so I can be even a better instructor? And I'm sure the community will pull together and say, yeah, go take this course or that course. So we're at the early stages of a big process. But I can assure you that the department's goal is to have a reasonable, efficient process in place where educational institutions can have peer-led leadership outdoor education programs. And I think we're right on the edge of finally accomplishing that.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Colonel Scott. That's really helpful. Go ahead, Megan Mack.
I also think it's just important to point out, as an administrator, you will be responsible if you're in that position, responsible for the new instructors that are coming in under your umbrella. So just to be aware, there will be a lot asked of the administrator position because you are verifying the institution and the instructor at the institution, or many institutions. And John, to your question, I didn't mention this, but when you're applying for an ETL, it'll cost you $25. Then you're going to have a WUFA, which is generally anywhere from $200 to $250, plus your CPR, which is in that range as well, $200 to $250. So we haven't really discussed what the price is, but we do know it's a free market, and we do know that this is going to be needed. So just taking that all into consideration when coming up with a price for these teachers, and thinking about the school system, about 250, 25 plus whatever else it would be.
I think, yeah, that's all
Thank
really,
you.
really, really helpful. I think also John asked, can we fit it all in 8 hours? The reality is that a lot of institutions will do a lot more than 8 hours of training, right? So I know at UMaine, our student leaders get probably 30 hours of training before they do anything in the field, even as an apprentice. But we made this so that it was reasonable. I always think back to the PE teacher taking her students canoeing, right? Like, that can be done really safely, and we want to make sure that she can do that and be in compliance and not be overly burdened. So it's sort of a balancing act there. The renewal period for the ETL permit is every 5 years. Please note that the permit is only valid if the holder also has a current WUFA. So just like everything, a lot of things, you sort of have to keep your eye on your own dates and stuff, and make sure that you're in compliance and that you're keeping up to date with WUFA, or obviously a higher level of certification. If someone had a WUFA, that would be fine too. So yeah, thank you so much for everyone to do that, answering those questions in the chat.
I had a quick question. Oh, go ahead.
Just one other reality that we as a department learned through this process. And this is why, there's a balance between how long the curriculum should be. And I'm sure that some institutions will have their folks way better trained. We entered into this venture in order to make sure everybody was in compliance with the Maine guide law, which really only speaks to trips that have to do with paddling and primitive camping. So we're trying to make sure people are well educated to exercise those trips, but it was rapidly brought to our attention that you can climb the face of Kineo and this doesn't apply to you at all, but you can't camp at the base of it for the evening. So that's why there's this continued balance between, all right, how much training do we need? We want people to be well trained so we can lead very safe trips for students across the state. But at the same time, you can be engaged in other activities that aren't considered guiding and do whatever you want. We're hoping that over time, these trips, the administrator will make sure that the trips are everybody's well trained, no matter what activity they're engaged in, whether it's compliant with the guide law, whether it's paddling or camping or something, some kind of winter hiking. But that was one of the struggles that we as a department had was, we're regulating certain activities because they happen to be part of the law, but there's other activities that are completely unregulated. So we're trying to find a balance between those two situations.
Yeah, and I will add that when we created the curriculum for the ETL training, our most important outcome from that training is that people leave with a really solid understanding of their own skill level, the skill level of their potential participants, and based on that information, what they can safely lead. So if people come away going, okay, I know what my skill level is. I know, where my participants will typically be. And I feel, I know that it's reasonable for me to lead this kind of trip and not this kind of trip. If people come away with that information after that training, then we have done our jobs. Ryan, go ahead and ask your question. And then if no one else has any questions, we'll wrap up with just the info to leave you all with.
Great. I was just about the getting the message out. I know that was something that I thought about in this whole process of like how that goes out. And I think Dan spoke to this a little bit as well, is that there's so much that folks can do. So I can see this knee-jerk reaction of like, oh my gosh, shut down the outdoors to all these students. And we do not want that. So that's my plea to the committee, is like, make sure that it's really clear that they can continue to do things, but some things we're going to require some more training. That's one thing. Just want to make sure that that's in there when you do that, however you're going to do that. And then as someone would be an independent or regional support of this, just thinking about when are you going to put that message out? So then that would be something that obviously someone like myself would be interested in when people are starting to think about that.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. So we will also say, we ask you to help us spread the word about how much people can do and be in compliance with the law without having an ETL. So please help us spread the word, because I think there has been some knee-jerk reactions, some people kind of freaking out. And we keep trying to remind people like, hey, if you take students cross-country skiing behind your school, like, you do not need an ETL permit for that, right? So definitely help us spread that word. I think this FAQ document, which I put the draft in the chat, so you're welcome to download that. Please download it. Just understand that it might get updated at some point. That will be live on the department website soon. So we definitely would ask you to help spread the word that way. And then we have been asked, how are we going to sort of keep track of who's doing what? And when you apply to be an ETL instructor, you're sort of going to come into our system, and we're going to have this list of resources. So we might know, Ryan, like if you're in that area of the state and we know someone needs some help, we might be able to send them to you. I do want to add, you all here, because we invited you, you're already registered Maine guides, right? So because at the beginning, all of our ETLIs will have to be registered Maine guides. That means that you could also be an ETL administrator. So you may decide, or you may find that would be really helpful. It could be that you just happen, I'm going to throw Greg out there. Greg works in East Millinocket. He lives in Millinocket. He does a lot of outdoor recreation support in the Millinocket area for the schools between Katahdin, East Mill, and Mill. Greg might say, or talk to his group there and say, man, it really makes sense for us to have an ETL administrator in-house. How about I apply and I serve as the administrator for our districts? That would make a lot of sense. And we would give Greg a big high five and hug for doing that. It also, you all are all registered Maine guides. So you might make connections to your local school. You probably already have connections to your local institutions, and you might offer that to them as well. So when I send out an email to all of you, I will also send out the ETL administrator application, because some of you may want to do that. And just know that we're not quite as far along in the process of managing that yet, but we would definitely get back to you eventually about that. And then of course, some folks in-house they'll need to have an ETL administrator in-house. I'm thinking of John Bankston at Colby. Like, you're going to be managing a lot of folks, you'll want an ETLA at Colby. I'm going to be an ETLA at UMaine. So, that's coming down the road too. We were just trying to get one thing done first, which is the ETLIs. So I think everyone shared their email in the chat. I think I've shared the link to the instructor application. I've shared the FAQ. Anything I'm missing, committee friends?
Lauren, can I just say something real quick?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to thank you and Chris for running the committee and all the committee members, because it's been a really heavy lift and we knew it would be. And we're at the department very appreciative. And I'm speaking on behalf of the colonel and the commissioners and deputy commissioner and everybody in licensing. And it's a big task to get this rolling. And the committee members serve for a 5-year term. they're not supposed to serve more than 2 5-year consecutive terms. So once they get the ball rolling, they may be looking for other people to step in and take some of the initiative. But I think this first year is going to be a lot of work and we really appreciate it. So thank you for your professionalism.
Thanks, Crystal.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I know we all do. We've felt very supported by the department, and thanks to everyone on this call because you are part of our outdoor education community in Maine. So we appreciate the work you do. You'll hear from us via email. And please don't hesitate to reach out to anyone on the committee, or if you only have my email, you're welcome to just reach out to me if you have questions that need to be answered. And also, if you have questions from people in your community that you don't feel you can answer, feel free to share the frequently asked questions document with them or just send them our way. So if people really need some extra assistance, just send them to the committee. So thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.